So I know this is a weird day, especially if it's your first time here. Joke's on you. But as a wise man once sang, once in a while you get shown the light in the strangest of places if you look at it right. I said that. Jerry Garcia said that. So we aim for novelty today. I mean, don't dominate the rap, Jack, if you've got nothing new to say. So in honor of the dead, the Grateful Dead, the band, the Grateful Dead, I'm going to try to say something new. I will also, in honor of the Grateful Dead and emulation thereof, make plain my whole sermon right at the beginning. Then I will disassemble and adorn the thing to the point where maybe we all get lost and do not remember what song is being sung. But then I'll bring it back to mean something that makes sense right at the end. And then we'll all bid you good night. Does that sound appropriate for a sermon delivered by Jerry Garcia? Yeah. I thought so, yeah. So here it is in plain speech. Imagination, that capacity we are engaging with this morning. Imagination is essential to spiritual experience, to sensing spiritual connection. Living in an enchanted world requires imagination. Magic requires imagination. I'm talking here about sleight of hand magic, but I'm also talking about the old bone magic of the shaman and witch. It requires imagination, not because these things are not real. Magic is almost all that there is. Spiritual connection, too, is real and ongoing all the time. Being aware of it requires imagination. Spiritual agency requires imagination. In fact, I'm going to propose that magic is fundamental. That you cannot live without participating in it all the time. In fact, you're doing magic right now. You are presently having a spiritual experience. And if you can't see it or feel it, that's probably because we are constantly taking the wondrous for granted. If imagination is required to sense spiritual connection, to see magic, to have a spiritual experience, and we are doing it all the time, well, then it's probably best to know it and get good at it. As a wise man once sung, since it costs a lot to win and even more to lose, you and me better spend some time wondering what to choose. A quick note. Today I'm using magic, enchantment, and spiritual experience interchangeably, so when you hear one, hear them all. And this is a perspective illuminated by David Abram, an eco-spiritual philosopher who, as a young person, worked his way all over the world as a street musician. He busked, got change, and moved to the next town. That took him all the way to Tibet, and at one point he tells of an encounter he had when, after gaining the trust of the people there, he was invited by the local shaman into a healing ceremony. And so there was a woman who was sick. She had a physical ailment. And so she had gone to see the shaman, who was then performing this ceremony in a room with the woman, and David David was maybe off in the corner just watching the thing. And at one point, there's lots of, bells and whistles, so to speak. And at one point, the shaman reaches into this woman's stomach and pulls out a great gob of goo. But David was a street magician, and he knew the tricks. And he knew where the gob of goo was really coming from, and he knew that it was sleight of hand. And in fact, he remembers that the shaman kind of looked over at him when he was doing this, and they had sort of a meeting of minds of, street magicianship. David also noticed that the woman who was sick also knew that this was just sleight of hand, that she was aware of that as well. Nonetheless, she was healed. The woman knew it was cosplay and was still healed. It's a true story because that's how it happened, but it's also a true story because of the truth that it reveals. It reveals that magic is both not what we think it is and real. And as I said, you're doing it now. Insofar as any of this that we are doing here together has any meaning at all, you are doing magic. Meaning is a kind of enchantment. What sunlight means, what the color of lipstick means, what love means, what death means, what mountains mean, what it means to serve a greater purpose or to be served cold coffee instead of hot coffee. Meaning is magic. Meaning is connective and world building. Meaning saturates the world with intelligence. Meaning is an experience of the spirit, as it is the mind reaching out beyond the body shell and into the vast and varied world and being impacted by it. You are currently having a spiritual experience. Now, magic has to do with the power to manipulate reality, or more accurately, influence perception. Understanding that in almost all cases, perception renders reality, even as perception is a shaped thing. Perception and reality are not exactly the same, but they are inseparable. And sometimes manipulating perception is actually manipulating material reality. That's exactly what Abram's shaman was doing. That woman got better. That was a material result based on cosplay. A shared story, a dose of expectation, and some authority. And Bob's your uncle. It was a co-created reality that somehow determined material reality. Now you may say with admirable skepticism, "Hey, Jerry, shaping reality with your mind is the stuff of holy roller healers and mad New Age vision board hokum." And you'd be right, just not entirely right. The more comprehensive reality is that magic is just perceptually ingested placebo. Enchantment operates like placebo, and researchers have found that, quote, placebo treatments can trigger measurable changes in the brain, immune system, and hormone function. I mean, we already did this. We stood heroically and affected our endocrine system. And do you know how important your endocrine system is to your health? Placebo is powerful medicine. In another study, researchers told some track athletes that what they thought of as pre-race jitters actually improved performance, while telling another group that this sort of arousal was usually detrimental. The athletes performed accordingly when the pressure was on. And in another athletic study, the researchers gave every subject a personality questionnaire and then randomly gave some of them false feedback that their answers indicated that they were the sort of person who thrives under pressure. And when it came time to compete, the athletes told they would likely do better under pressure did so. Placebo works even if you know it's an exercise of imagination. David Abram understood that the Tibetan woman knew that there was a sleight of hand at play. But that sleight of hand may have been a medium of meaning that caused her body to change and heal. There's another study where one group took a migraine drug labeled with the drug's name, and another took a placebo labeled placebo, and a third group took nothing. The group who took placebo labeled placebo was 50%, that medicine was 50% as effective as the real drug to reduce pain after a migraine attack. So what is going on? So in that case, the researchers speculated that a driving force behind this reaction was the simple act of taking a pill. People associate the ritual of taking medicine as a positive healing effect. So this is the sleight of hand that you are aware of. Even if they know it's not medicine, the action itself can stimulate the brain into thinking that the body is being healed. That is a measurable impact of medical cosplay. Okay, you say, but all that stuff has the whiff of the mental about them. They're all brainy stuff, and we intellectual Westerns paradoxically tend to think that brainy stuff might be fake, which is so rich with irony that I think I may have just gained a few pounds even saying it. But come on, we've all seen somebody fake a migraine. I mean, we have mirrors. But dig this. There are several well-documented studies of knee procedures where patients who received sham operations, incisions, they were cut open without the full surgical repair, and they improved almost as much as those who received the real procedure. Apologies if you've just done a knee surgery. It's an imaginary operation. The consistent and weird thing is that impacts like this aren't usually achievable in isolation. You would have a hard time convincing yourself that your knee is getting better. And please, do not cut your knee open and then tell yourself you've done an operation. So there are teeth on this key that unlocks our imagination and our healing power. You cannot will yourself to release pain-relieving endorphins by believing hard enough in a sugar pill. For that, you actually need ritual, a white coat, an authority figure. You need a story, and you need someone else. What this means is that magic is cooperative. Spirit is relationship. They are based in shared story where the power is outside of us. And this is why faith is so powerful. You see, placebos it turns out, tend to be more effective when delivered by credible authorities. Pills work better when prescribed by doctors wearing white coats. Expensive pills outperform cheap ones. And injections produce stronger responses than tablets in placebo studies. So the article that I source a lot of this from goes on to note that people are walking around with one of the most powerful healing systems ever documented, locked inside of them, and they can reliably access it only when someone in a position of authority gives them permission. But if a needle is more effective than a pill, then it's not just about the authority of a human. Authority can be a tree, or a lake, a thunderhead, as much as a profession, if your story is strong enough. Now, enchantment is about faith. Meaning is about imagination invested with deep trust. Trust, which is another word for expectation, is incredibly important when it comes to the spiritual task of rendering reality. Trust is your authority. Faith then becomes materially influential, and that faith in authority can be faith in a god, a shaman, the process of the earth, stars, the all-clear call of a chickadee, a tarot deck. Having said that, let me, as your minister and rock and roll icon, say unto you, you have my permission to be healthy. You have my permission to be powerful. You have my permission to be loved and to love, to grieve wildly, and to be enough. I mean, I'm an authority, right? I look like an authority, don't I? Okay, all you Herods out there are saying, fine. We can affect ourselves, but we can't change reality, like material reality. Do you honestly think I would set up such an obviously self-aggrandizing rhetorical trap without the ability to slay it already cued? Never. And here it is. Researchers found that in one study of dogs don't have my dog has a pretty active imagination, but it's limited. In one study of dogs with osteoarthritis, owners reported improvement, roughly 57% of the time, for animals only receiving placebo. Now, dogs cannot believe a treatment they're giving will work. They have no concept of receiving medication. That's not a story that dogs hold. Yet when the owners and vets believe an animal is being treated, they consistently report improvements in pain and mobility. That's nuts. We're like magic wands of placebo. That is us affecting another being by our belief, by our shared story. Now, because of that, it's also true, and we shouldn't turn away from the fact that faith and authority can be abused. It certainly has been. Meaning is neutral. Magic is neutral. Power is neutral. We must be incredibly careful about which story our enchantment is based in and who in that story is calling the shots. Because, as a wise man once sang, if you plant ice, you're going to harvest wind. And this is where that delicious vocabulary word we discussed last week comes in. Imagination must be partnered with an effective epistemology. Epistemology, for those who weren't here, is about how we know what we know. How we know what we know. And if faith in authority can be a god, a shaman, the process of the earth, the stars, or a tarot deck, then we need to have the ability to test it, or at least give it a container. How we do that is actually a whole other reflection. But activating our value of pluralism, rooted in love, is at least a start. All this is to say that to point out that our enchantment requires imagination does not cheapen or delegitimize either. In the same way that myth has come to mean untrue, when in fact it is myths that house our most treasured understandings, imaginary has come to mean fake, when in reality it is the very medium of meaning and connection and the very sign of intelligence. Enchantment requires imagination. Spiritual experience requires imagination. Magic requires imagination. Meaning requires imagination, not because they're not real, but because imagination renders the real and imbues material and events with significance that change lives. And if that is true, if it is true, then imagination is a prayer to your world for what it is and what it could be. Imagination is a prayer to your world. So have mercy. Have mercy and grace in your yearnings and dreams. Have mercy and grace in how you look to the world, to each other, and to yourself. Have mercy and grace. Be like bird song at dawn. Be the reliable punctuation of a mountain range, the boundless sky of the plains. Be the adoration in a puppy's gaze. Be the abundant and generous medium of music. Be like sunlight through a tree, like water on a summer's day. And if you get confused, just listen to the music play.